Hi everyone, I'm going to discuss the editorial section of the Hindu newspaper dated 14 June 2023. So let's start. So our first article is titled as Tax Law in the Shadow of the Higher Judiciary. So the author is discussing two recent judgments by the Supreme Court here that have been said to undermine the principles of the taxation law. So हमारे पहले केस का नाम है ITO वर्सेस विक्रम सुजीत कुमार भाटिया that dealt with the retrospective effect of an amendment to the इनकम टैक्स एक्ट जो एक अमेंडमेंट हुई थी इनकम टैक्स एक्ट के लिए सो इट इज डिस्कसिंग द इफेक्ट ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर अमेंडमेंट. Now, before the amendment, the law allowed the revenue to proceed against third parties. So, the law is allowing the revenue to proceed against third parties if the seized material belongs or belong to them. Several high courts interpreted this provision narrowly, requiring evidence that the material actually belongs to the person. So, इस केस में ये बोल रहे हैं that बहुत सारे हाई कोर्ट्स ने इस पर्टिकुलर प्रोविजन को बहुत ही वेगली बहुत ही नैरोली इंटरप्रेट किया है, प्रॉपरली इंटरप्रेट नहीं किया. So it means that it is requiring evidence that the material actually belongs to the person. Now, this particular case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court क्या करता है, इस decision को reverse कर देता है and held that the amended law, जो भी हमारा law change हुआ है, law में amendment आई है, which substituted belong or belong to with pertains or pertain to should apply retrospectively. So सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये बोला है, it changed that particular, it substituted that particular term belongs or belong to with the words pertains or pertain to. Now it should apply case to case, it should apply retrospectively. Okay. Now हमारा सेकंड केस है यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया वर्सेस आशीष अग्रवाल. इसमें क्या होता है, देयर इज द रिवाइवल ऑफ रीअसेसमेंट नोटिसेस इशूड बाय रेवेन्यू without legal authorization. The revenue had relied on executive notifications during the COVID-19 period. Now, during the COVID-19 period, क्या होता है? They continue to issue notices under the repeal provision. Now, several high courts declared these notices invalid, but the Supreme Court reversed these decisions, revived the cost notices, deeming them to have been issued under the amended law. Now, the court justified its decision by suggesting that the revenue officials were unaware of the law and that their mistakes should not harm the exchequer. Now, although the high courts they declare these notices invalid, Supreme Court reversed that decision and it revived those caused notices, and it's just said that those revenue officials were unaware of the law and that mistake should not harm the exchequer or the person in charge of the money. Now, the author criticizes the Supreme Court's approach in both cases. Now, author is criticizing. Author is, he's dealing with both of the cases, and he's arguing that the court has overstepped its role. Now, court's role is that it has to it has to interpret it has to interpret the law, but it has acted as the maker of the law. Now the judgments have encroached on the legislative function and given legitimacy to illegitimate actions. Now these judgments they have given legitimacy to the illegitimate actions of the officials. Furthermore, the court's use of Article 142 of the Constitution to pass orders for complete justice raises concerns, as this power should not be applied in violation of statutory law. Now, this particular law is the law which is formed by the legislature of the country. The author emphasizes that the principles of legality and certainty in taxation law require a commitment from both the sides, from the sides of legislature and the courts or the judiciary, and these recent judgments have undermined that commitment. Now, our next article is titled as Musings on the Frictions in India-Canada Ties. So, this particular article deals with the relationship, the diplomatic relationship between India and Canada. So, the article discusses the recent controversy surrounding a pro-Khalistani parade in Brampton, Canada, where a tableau depicted the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. The Indian External Affairs Minister S. J. Shankar criticized Canada's tolerance of separatists and extremists, but did not directly mention Indira Gandhi. So what happened is that there was a tableau which depicted the assassination of the former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi during a pro-Khalistani parade in Canada. So the external affairs minister he criticized that in Canada is tolerating such kind of behavior from it is tolerating separatists, it is tolerating extremists, and he did not directly mention any name. The article highlights the importance of addressing the glorification of revenge for the assassination of a prime minister, regardless of political differences or controversial actions taken by the leader. Now, the article here is highlighting that such kind of behavior of vengeance or its glorification of revenge by assassinating a prime minister, although whatever actions controversial actions were taken by the leader, it should not be glorified, it should not be promoted, it should not be tolerated at all. Now, it also mentions the role of Indian diaspora in Canadian politics and the need for Indian politicians to consider their approaches towards diaspora communities in foreign policy. And this article it also mentions that in Canadian politics there is a role of the Indian diaspora or the Indian people or the Indian communities, and there is a need that Indian politicians they consider they should form their approaches towards such kind of communities in their foreign policy. And the article further touches upon a remark made by Canada's National Security and Intelligence Advisor Jody Thomas, accusing India of foreign interference. To which Mr. Jaishankar responded by dismissing the comment. So Jaishankar dismissed that particular comment, and the article concludes by acknowledging the strained bilateral ties between India and Canada due to issues like separatism and current political dynamics in Canada, particularly the influence of new Democratic Party leaders, Jagmeet Singh, who is sympathetic to the Khalistani movement. So, there is a huge Indian vote bank in Canada, and the ministers there they are very they need those particular vote banks to win the elections. So they need to be diplomatic in kind of dealing with issues like separatism and the political dynamics in Canada. So such kind of behavior should not be tolerated in order to deal with separatism and extremism. So our next article is titled as "Where Anyone Can Be Accused of Sedition." So this particular article deals with the sedition law in India. The article discusses the current state of the debate on sedition in India, drawing on the 279th Law Commission report that recommends retaining the law of sedition. So there was a Law Commission report published recently that recommended the retaining of the law of sedition. Now, it suggests three significant recommendations: amending Section 1 to 4A of the Indian Penal Code to incorporate the meaning of sedition as defined by the Supreme Court in the Kedarnath Singh case; increasing the minimum sentence for sedition from 3 to 7 years. So it is, these particular 2 points, they mean that the minimum sentence, which is right now 3 years for sedition, it should be increased to 7 years. And the meaning of sedition, there are different meanings of sedition as per Indian law, Indian case laws. So the particular uh, meaning that should be incorporated of sedition is the Kedarnath Singh case, and requiring a preliminary inquiry by a police officer of inspector rank or higher before registering first information reports (FIR) in sedition cases. Now, the thing with this, with the last point, is that the article is criticizing the proposed amendments that adds the word tendency to incite violence to the law, stating that it deflects attention from the source of criminality and focuses on the ambit of criminality. Now, the article is criticizing that the proposed amendment is adding words tendency to incite violence. Now, tendency to incite violence is a very vague term to interpret the law, and stating it deflects attention from the source of criminality. Now, it is deflecting the attention from the very source of criminality, and it is diverting the focus on the ambit of criminality. The author argues that the proposed amendment will not fundamentally change the meaning of sedition, which is the offense of inciting hatred, contempt, and disaffection against the government. The concept of tendency is seen as ambiguous. Now, it is very vague in its meaning, and it allows inclusions of expressions that may have no direct connection to public disorder. Now, it means that this particular word, it allows that there can be expressions which might not have created that public disorder, and it is the article points out that this ambiguity, it is creating confusion. It is leaving room for the misuse of the sedition law. Regarding the recommendation for a preliminary inquiry by the police, the article argues that it does not address the fundamental issues with the law. So it is not addressing the fundamental issues with the law, but the inclusion of mere inclination to violence without proof of actual violence or imminent threat further broadens the scope of acts that can be deemed sedition. Now, it means that if there is, mere inclination to violence, even if there would have been no actual violence or no imminent threat, it is broadening the scope of acts that can be deemed seditious. So, just inclination to violence can, it is broadening the scope of acts which may not have been in direct connection to public disorder, those kind of acts that can be deemed sedition. So it leaves room for such kind of confusion. So the author suggests that this proposal, it is empowering police, and it is opening door for potential abuse, particularly when political influence is involved. Now, when political parties are involved, or when big political leaders are involved, such acts can be misused easily, and the police can it misuse the power, and it is leaving a door for potential abuse. The article also highlights the disregard of developments in other countries that have invalidated sedition laws. It argues that the ground realities in India, such as the large number of sedition cases filed against individuals for criticizing the government or engaging in seemingly harmless act, call for an evaluation of law. Now, many developed countries have invalidated sedition laws. Now, the thing with sedition law is that it was enacted by the British government against anti-government elements, anti-British government elements particularly. So it is a very draconian law, and it was enacted in the colonial era. So it is kind of a colonial law. So whenever there were any uprisings against the government for independence in the country, so they those people who tried to motivate the public against the government, motivate and there were any uprising in the country, so they were jailed for the sedition law. They were charged for the sedition law, and hence it is said that even after so many years of independence, we are still stuck with such kind of colonial laws. So it is arguing that the ground realities in India now, there are very large number of sedition cases. They were, just they were filed against individuals for just criticizing the governments and engaging in seemingly harmless acts. Now, it kind of violates the right to freedom of speech and expression very badly, and it there is a need for the revaluation of the law. The author questions the retention of a colonial era law that suppresses dissent and limits accountability. Now, if you do not criticize the government, it leaves a question that how will they improve their working, how will you make the government accountable if you do not criticize their bad actions. So that the author questions the retention of such kind of law, which is limiting accountability. In conclusion, the article criticizes the Law Commission's recommendation for retaining sedition laws. It argues that the proposed amendments do not address the underlying issues, and they are not, they are not dealing with the fundamental issues with the law, but they are instead trying to perpetuate the problem. They are trying to increase the problem associated with the law, including ambiguity, which is the vagueness associated with the terms of the law, and potential misuse and the suppression of dissent in a democratic society. We live in a democracy. Dissent should never be suppressed. Right to freedom of speech should always be respected. So our next article is the high burden of diabetes and BP in Kerala and West Bengal. So the article discusses the findings of a study conducted by the ICMR India Diabetes, published in the Lancet, which reveals high levels of non-communicable diseases. Now, what does non-communicable diseases mean? Non-communicable diseases are those diseases which do not spread from one person to other with from physical contact. The study focused on the prevalence of diabetes. Diabetes is a non-communicable disease. Hypertension is high blood pressure. Abdominal obesity. Obesity is, and hypertriglyceridemia in both rural and urban regions across various states. So the study highlights the burden of these NCDs, and adverse health condition varies across states. For example, in rural Uttar Pradesh, they had a relatively low prevalence of diabetes but high rates of hypertriglyceridemia. So this particular disease, it is a medical condition when it is characterized by high levels of triglycerides in the blood. So this particular disease, it aggravates your cardiac issues and increases your chances of getting a stroke or cardiac arrest. And in rural Gujarat, diabetes prevalence was low, while hypertension prevalence was relatively high. The most concerning finding was the alarmingly high burden of all four conditions in certain states such as Kerala, West Bengal, Sikkim, and Goa. Now, the articles tries to it tries to emphasize the need for a state specific policy. That means that rather than implementing one uniform policy for the entire country, state specific policies should be, it should be formed, and there should be interventions that address variations in disease burden. Now, if suppose rural Gujarat, the diabetes prevalence was low, while hypertension prevalence was relatively high. So, dealing with hypertension is their should be their main agenda, uh, and intervention should address these type of variations rather than implementing a uniform approach across the country. The survey was conducted between 2008 and 2020. It was the sample size is so and so. The definitions are written as below. So there are maps that show the rural urban prevalence. 11 point, these numbers are important. 11.4% of Indians had diabetes, 35.5% were hypertensive, 39.5% had abdominal obesity, and 32.1% had hypertriglyceridemia. Now, gender differences were also observed, slightly higher rates of diabetes and hypertension among men, and more women had abdominal obesity. So, in summary, the study highlights the concerning levels of non communicable diseases in the country and the variations that were observed among various states. So, there should be it is emphasizing that the implementation of those targeted policies and interventions to address these state specific health challenges. So let's move on to the vocabulary. So our first word is musings. So this means contemplations. When you think about a particular thought and contemplate over it. Gleaned means to gather or collect gradually. Illusory means deceptive or misleading. Sorry, it is pronounced as illusory. It's misleading. Diaspora. scattering of a particular group of people from their homeland. So I want you to find the meanings of this word, this word, and this word. I have already told the meaning of this word in the video when I was talking about the high version of NCDs in Kerala and West Bengal. So thank you. That's it from my side.